Hello and welcome everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to this event hosted by the Madrasa-Midrasha Program here at the GTU and co-sponsored by the Center for Art and Religion here at the GTU as well. I am here to welcome you all and to thank you for your participation and your time. We are going to be featuring two exceptional artists. This event called Active Art, Liat Berdugo and Pantea Karimi. And to facilitate and moderate our program today, we have Carol Bier. Carol Bier is a historian of Islamic art who has published widely on cultural aspects of geometry in Islamic art that inform a beauty of form, pattern, and structure. She is a research scholar at the Center for Islamic Studies here at the GTU. And concurrently, she is also a research associate at the Textile Museum in Washington, D.C. She's been in that position since 2001. And she also served as curator for Eastern Hemisphere collections. She was also the president of the Textile Society of America from 2006 to 2008. Welcome, Carol, and thank you for taking on this role of moderating and facilitating our fantastic presenters today, Liat Berdugo and Pantea Karimi. It's all yours, Carol. Thank you again for everyone who's taken their time to participate and to CARE for sponsoring this event and to the Walter and Elise Haas Fund for making these programmings possible. All yours, Carol. Welcome.
Thanks, Majabin. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Lydia. Thank you, CARE, for co-sponsoring this event. I am thrilled and honored to be able to introduce our illustrious presenters today, two artists who are recognized locally and globally, each of whose art embodies a form of activism. They each address contemporary issues through art, expressing anger, ambiguity, idealism, and hope. Liat Berdugo is an artist, writer, and educator whose work investigates embodiment, labor, and militarization in relation to capitalism, technological utopianism, and the Middle East. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally and is currently on view at The Wrong, a digital art biennale. Her latest book is The Weaponized Camera in the Middle East. Pantea Karimi is a multidisciplinary artist investigating the intersections of art, science, and history through early scientific manuscripts, books, and monuments and documents. Karimi's works are held in public and private collections and have been exhibited in diverse solo, group, and traveling exhibitions. Karimi is the recipient of the Silicon Valley Artist Laureates Award and the City of San Jose Arts and Cultural Exchange Grant. She is the artist in residence currently at the University of California, San Francisco Library. I will ask each artist to share their screen and talk for 20 minutes, followed by our conversation and discussion. If you as viewers have questions, please use the chat or the Q&A to enter your questions in a written format. And I'll be going through them and sorting which ones we'll have time to ask at the end towards the end of the program. I'd also like to advise you, if you'd like to maximize your screen, go up to the little view panel on the upper right of your screen and select speaker view. So the speaker's screen will be the largest, and then you have viewing options to maximize the screen that they are sharing with us. Pantea, can I ask you to begin and take it away? Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. My background is in science, graphic design, and fine arts. My work is focused on select medieval scientific manuscripts and documents, mainly from Iran. In today's presentation, I'll show works from a solo exhibition called Artful Attacks at the Mercury 20 Gallery in Oakland, California in July 2021. The works in this exhibition consisted of a 42-feet scroll, a series of political ceramic tiles, and a performative video. In this exhibition, I highlighted the Iranian visual culture, while as an artist expressed my emotions toward the current political tension between Iran and the West. The title Artful Attacks refers to the mysterious attacks that targeted Iran's nuclear site in 2020 near the historic city of Natanz in Isfahan province. Natanz has medieval architecture and sites and is located near the nuclear enrichment facility. You can see an image of the Natanz nuclear site attack on the left and one of the historic buildings from medieval on the right. For the works in Artful Attacks, I appropriated geometric patterns from a late medieval Iranian document called Topcopia Scroll. Similar patterns found in the Topcopia Scroll are used on the medieval architecture in Natanz. Images of the tile patterns from Natanz are on the right side of this slide. Topcopia Scroll is a 97-foot late medieval Iranian document housed at the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, Turkey. It compiles a collection of more than 100 geometric architectural drawings for vaults and tiling patterns using Kufic script. You can see images of the original Topkapi document on the left side. The Topcopia Scroll is a significant example of the interconnectivity of science and art from Iran. Between 2020 and early 21, in the months I was working on this new series, I was deeply preoccupied with news of the Iranian government nuclear activities and the thoughts of political pressure and sanctions on Iranian people. I read the news every day. Certain words constantly surface in both the Western and the Iranian media, such as cyber attacks, mysterious explosions, covert war, and so on. To respond to my feelings about the political news I read daily, I created a series of political ceramic tiles, but I replaced all the original words with select words that surfaced in both the Western and the Iranian media, such as covert war, political tension, cyber attack, sanctions, suspicious explosion, and nuclear power, which you can see on this slide. My ceramic tiles are directly inspired by the original tile patterns found in the Topcopia Scroll that use Kufic geometric script. Like Kufic geometric ceramic tiles found in both Topcopia Scroll and Natanz historic shrines and mosques, my Kufic arrangements are composed in a somewhat undecipherable manner. There are two examples of my tiles on this slide. On the far upper right corner, the Kufic pattern reads Allahu Akbar, which means God is great. In my ceramic tile, I replaced the words with Tahrim, which means sanctions, and Qudrat, which means power. On the bottom far right corner, the words on the original Topcopia Scroll Kufic pattern are not presenting meaningful words. So I replaced them with قدرت هسته‌ای on my tile, which means nuclear power. I then replaced the Persian blue tile color with black and yellow from the standard nuclear power logo. The second piece in this series is my 42-inch by 42 feet scroll, which I created using 6 separate charcoal drawings, which I assembled together to produce the length of 42 feet. This is the same process that was used to produce the medieval 97-foot Topcopia Scroll. My augmented scroll showcases my take on Islamic geometry in the context of contemporary Iranian politics. In the exhibition, I presented the scroll on a bed close to the ground, attached to a wooden rod on one end, exactly how Topcopia Scroll was made. To create the drawings for my 42-foot scroll, I started the geometric patterns symmetrically, but gradually and intentionally made all of them asymmetrical. Breaking the symmetry of the geometrical patterns is an act of departure from the traditional Islamic symmetrical pattern making. I used asymmetry so to be able to interpret the patterns at the intersection of art and science in political and cultural contexts. So much of Iranian history and culture are hidden behind its political identity. In creating my scroll, erasure is a rejection of culture and history and is a form of an attack to eliminate them. My scroll's two-dimensional charcoal drawings reveal much of my artistic methods, but I thought my emotions towards the elimination of history and culture had to be captured through a live recording. So I filmed my drawings production in 3 phases: drawing, erasure, and recoloring. This repetitive act became increasingly performative throughout the 6 months of my scroll's production. On this slide on the left, you can see still images from the 3-part performative video, which I called Alter in Every Direction. On the right, you can see stage 3 of the erasure process from one of the drawings on top and my eraser shavings on the bottom. I drew the geometric patterns using charcoal and filled in some of the geometric shapes with blue that are found in Persian tiles in Natanz historic sites. I then erased the patterns and the blue and replaced it with the yellow from the nuclear power logo. I drew the patterns and erased them again. I repeated this process for all the drawings. You can see an example from drawing 1 here. Through erasing, blurring, redrawing, decoloring, and recoloring the same patterns, I created new surfaces. These new disturbed, deconstructed, interrupted, and interlaced geometric patterns are metaphor for political pressure, tension, and power play. People of Iran, including my family, have been under tremendous pressure because of the sanctions. The works in this exhibition collectively represent my emotional unease about the maximum pressure on the people of Iran under sanctions and the threats to the historic city of Natanz and its medieval architecture as an exemplar of Iranian history, culture, and nation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pantea, for this really illuminating and beautiful view into your work as an artist, and so clearly explaining the process of your art. I'd like to discuss it more fully and raise additional questions after we've heard from Liat. Liat, take it away. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let me share my screen. Okay. So thank you, Pantea, for your talk, and Carol for moderating, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes, and before I get into my topic today, I want to share a bit of background about myself as an artist. I'm a new media artist, and I often get the question, what is new media? I like to think of new media art as anything that uses technology as the medium of the artwork itself. So this includes not only AR and VR, but also digital art, internet art, video games, 3D printing, smartphone apps, and so on. Here is an iPhone app I coded as a commissioned artwork for the Center for Contemporary Art, or CCA, in Tel Aviv. And in this piece that I coded, visitors could only access the Wi-Fi in the museum by shaking their smartphones vigorously. So they would try to connect to the Wi-Fi. They'd be prompted through the app to shake vigorously for internet connection. And they'd have to do that for a solid minute before being able to interact with the Wi-Fi. This piece asks the question, what is it that our bodies are willing to do for technology? And then I also think of new media art as anything where technology is not just the medium, but is the subject of the artwork. So it's work about technology. And I'll show a few examples of this in my work. So this is a performance art piece, Internet Aerobics, that came out just when we went into lockdown last year for COVID. And it's a 20-minute aerobics routine about the internet, streaming through the internet. It uses props of blue Ethernet cables to talk about issues such as net neutrality and internet speed. Or this project was a landscape art piece called Encoded Forest, which encodes a Wi-Fi password in binary in a field in Mendocino County, California. My collaborators and I gridded the field, and instead of using ones and zeros for our binary, we used a tree binary, so either tree or no tree. And we planted hundreds of redwood trees in the field. Future Wi-Fi seekers were instructed to walk along the forest to decode the password among the trees. My work involves a lot of video, especially when I work in my two-person art collective, Anxious to Make. We make work about the so-called sharing economy, and more recently about crypto. And my work investigates systems of power, whether that's power that comes from economic structures or other systems of oppression. So I'll turn now to the topic of my talk today, which draws from my book, The Weaponized Camera in the Middle East, that came out this past January from Bloomsbury and IB Tauris Press. And this book is about the effort to secure political justice through the use of citizen videography, meaning everyday people using their cell phones and video cameras against authorities, and doing this in Israel and Palestine. This image is taken in Israel-Palestine inside the West Bank in a small rural village called al-Ahmad in the South Hebron Hills. And it's a camera fight between an activist and an Israeli soldier who each put their cameras in each other's noses as a way to threaten the other, to confront the other, to record their side of the story in their quest for justice, and to block the other one from recording. The activist, who's on the left, frequently accompanied Palestinian shepherds to graze their sheep and originally used his camera to document violations by Israeli soldiers and settlers. And here the soldier decides to film back at him, giving him what he later called the cell phone procedure, meaning putting his cell phone camera right in the activist's face and following him with it in an elaborate dueling dance of cameras. And this image itself is filmed by a third cameraman, Ahmed Reini, a Palestinian volunteer with the human rights organization B'Tselem. B'Tselem started a camera project in 2007, 3 years before the Arab Spring brought vast attention to the emancipatory potential of technology. And so with this project, B'Tselem distributes video cameras to Palestinians living in the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem in an effort to combat human rights violations of the Israeli occupation. Today, there are around 200 B'Tselem issued cameras in the field, and B'Tselem has amassed an archive of over 4,500 hours of raw footage, only a fraction of which is published online. And one thing that distinguishes the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the freedom to record. So Israeli law is more lenient on recording in public than the state of Massachusetts. And when I was living in Tel Aviv in 2013, I met the director of the B'Tselem Camera Project, and I began going into B'Tselem headquarters to watch these videos. Here's a screenshot of what the archive interface looks like. And I went there sort of without an agenda, except to see the conflict through a lens that was not my own. As a citizen of Israel, I'm forbidden by Israeli law from going to major Palestinian cities like Ramallah, Jenin, or Hebron. So I couldn't see these things firsthand. And I've since gone to these places on my American passport to speak with the B'Tselem volunteers who filmed. And I come to this work with a very specific framework, and that is that I'm not an expert in Middle East studies or in history or in politics or in religion. But as a new media artist, I am trained to think about how things look, to think about aesthetics, video frames, framing, the visual realm, and visual culture. And this visual approach is really important in Israel-Palestine because the Israeli occupation has devoted considerable and national effort to a distinctly visual erasure of Palestinians. So this visual erasure comes in the form of planting forests over the ruins of Palestinian villages, or supplanting Arab street and town names with Hebrew ones, creating visually separate roadways through the West Bank for Israeli citizens, and of course by creating an 8-meter tall separation wall that literally blocks non-citizen Palestinians from sight. And at the same time, the Israeli occupation has devoted significant effort to a visual domination of Palestinians. So they do this with watchtowers, aerial photography, strip searches, which of course are a visual tool, brigades of female soldiers who serve as tatzpitaniot, or watchers, patrolling live border cameras from remote viewing stations. And from a visual studies approach, which is the basis of my work, I see this conflict as one that's produced an inequality of visual rights. These are the rights to see and be seen, to look and to surveil, to be out of sight, right? To be free of surveillance, for instance, and to have one's image trusted rather than subject to digital suspicion through claims of photoshopping or cropping or falsification in post-production. This visual studies approach isn't unique to Israel-Palestine. It applies to many other conflicts, like this country's police violence against Black and brown bodies, where citizens film the cops and the cops film back with their body cams. So if we think about it, there are two kinds of shooting. There's shooting with a gun and shooting with a camera. And there's also different ways that a camera and a gun can be positioned in relation to each other. So these are gunshot point of view and barrel point of view. Now, gunshot point of view is where cameras are aligned with weapons, so where they stare out down the sight lines of a gun. Take this image, for instance, from 1948. Here, 2 Jewish snipers are stationed above Palestinians in the field below, who are waiting to turn themselves into the newly formed state of Israel to be counted. So in this picture, you see the gun and the camera are facing the same direction. Or take this image from one of the most popular videos of the Israeli Defense Force, or IDF's, YouTube channel. In this video, a drone enters Israeli airspace, is caught in the sight lines of a missile launcher, so you see the crossbow there, and is then eliminated in a spectacular mid-air explosion. And 9 out of 10 of the most popular videos on IDF's YouTube channel are taken from gunshot point of view, which is a position of both symbolic power, but also literal shooting power. And I contrast that with barrel point of view. So this is where cameras are positioned against weapons, facing back at the barrel of a gun. So take this example from 2013, when a B'Tselem videographer named Muhammad Awad was documenting a protest in his village near Hebron. When he was documenting, a soldier shot a high-velocity tear gas canister directly at him. So in the top frame, you see the canister sort of hovering above the soldier's head, and in the bottom frame, you see it get larger and approach the videographer himself. And the blow of such tear gas canisters has killed many Palestinians, but luckily this videographer, Awad, survived, and he captured the exact moment of his bodily image on his B'Tselem video camera. Some B'Tselem volunteers said to me, "My camera is a weapon." This is what Imad Abu Shamshia said to me, and then he turned to my translator and said, "It's a beautiful sentence, translate it for her." And I agree, it is a beautiful sentence. And these cameras are weapons, not the kind that try to inflict bodily harm, but a kind of weapon that's used to gain advantage or exert control over another. So I want to show you what some of this footage looks like, taken in barrel point of view. This is a video from 2017 that was published by B'Tselem, in which a volunteer named Ahmed Ziada videotaped his own arrest by Israeli soldiers. And I want you to know a few things about this video before I play it. So it's around 2 minutes long. I find it a bit hard to watch. It has English subtitles, but the actual video has 2 different languages in it. So first, the B'Tselem volunteer and the soldier speak to each other in Arabic. But when the soldier speaks into his radio or to his fellow soldiers, he switches to Hebrew, which is a language this B'Tselem volunteer doesn't understand. And I want you to pay particular attention to what happens right before the arrest.
يلا روح
طخ نهام طخ
روح البيت
انا في البيت انت اللي شو بتسوي هون
روح البيت
انا في البيت انت شو بتسوي هون
روح البيت
انا في البيت هيا في البيت انا كنت انا وعيالي انت اللي شو بتسوي هون
روح البيت
انت اللي شو بتسوي هون
جيب الأوية
نعم بيت سلم بيت سلم
جيب الأوية
هاي هو فيش مشكله بس بيت
جيب
سلم
الأوية
هاي هو
שימו זה
صور בית סלם.
3 צעירים, 1 צמתי מצלמה, לא שזה מפריע לי יותר מדי. יאללה, רוח.
انا في ارضي في داري
אמרתי לך רוח, נכון?
ليش روح انا واقف هون انت اللي روح انت اللي روح انا واقف في بيتي
רוח אל בית.
انا واقف في بيتي انت اللي روح انا واقف ما عامل لك شيء ما مذاكك في شيء انت عكس الشباب طاشي مع بنات انت نزلت وخوفتهم.
אני עוד שנייה מתחיל הזיקה פה של אחד מהם. עוד קיבלתי, אני לוקח לו את המצלמה, עוזק אותו, השני לוחמים שלי יהיו מוכנים. בן, תוך כדור.
هاي الثاني
يلا واقف واقف.
هاي الثالث.
يلا جيب شيب.
فيش كاميرا فيش كاميرا.
لا له كدو غليم.
ابعد عني ابعد عني ابعد عني.
شيب شيب على الجبهة.
ابعد عني.
شيب على الجبهة.
كله على الكاميرا مبين.
شيب
كله على الكاميرا مبين.
طيب بنروح.
كله على الكاميرا مبين.
يلا تصور تصور تغير دايم تصور.
ما تصورني.
لا له تصور سيجار. شيب شيب شيب.
خليت ايدي وجهك مبين.
شيب.
هي
تغيد خادم كني خادم كني تغيد خادم كني.
So I always get a bit nauseous, honestly, watching this footage, but Ziada uses his camera as a tool of exposure, right? He catalogs the faces of the soldiers, saying, here's the second one, and here's the third. He defends his camera, saying, not the camera. He uses exposure as a threat, saying, it's all been recorded on the camera. And in the end, he declares hauntingly, your face can be seen, as if to deter the soldier from violence. And again, in looking at this clip, I'm not exactly asking whether the detention was right or justified. I'm asking how the camera is functioning in the field. And here it's functioning as a tool of exposure. This is the subject of the first chapter of my book. And the remaining chapters follow a taxonomy of how cameras are used in the field. Are they used to produce shame in the other, to try to align them extrajudiciously? Are they used to mirror back someone's actions to try to change them? Are they used as a shield to protect the person holding the camera? Are they used to produce evidence, or are they used as a weapon? And I want you to remember that the act of arming Palestinians with cameras was meant to reverse the normal order of visual domination under the Israeli occupation. Okay, this is an order where Israelis are empowered with the gaze and Palestinians are reduced to the position of displaying their bodies and IDs, especially at Israeli checkpoints. And this reversal is unwelcome by many Jewish Israelis. So here, a Jewish Israeli settler breaks a B'Tselem video camera by smashing it repeatedly against a rock. At official scales, the IDF established a special unit of combat cameramen in 2012. These served in the spokesperson's unit and were trained in both elite combat skills and camera skills. The IDF has institutionalized its use of cameras as tools for intimidation of occupied Palestinians in something that's called a mapping procedure. So this is where soldiers enter a Palestinian home at night, gather all residents into one room, and photograph each one. And these photographs are not the goal of the operation. One former soldier recalls, often we erase the image files by the end of the day. The purpose of the mapping procedure is to use the act of photography to instill fear through constant and very intimate surveillance. And this shooting back happens at civilian levels as well. So in 2011, Jewish Israeli organizations began providing cameras to Israeli settlers to film back in a direct response to B'Tselem's initiative. In the B'Tselem archives, I found hundreds of instances where cameras faced off against each other, where Palestinians and Jewish Israelis see each other and record each other in a direct tension of visioning. Here in this clip in 2012, a Palestinian videographer named Iyad Haddad videotaped as an Israeli soldier patrolled the aftermath of a settler attack. And annoyed at Haddad's filming, this soldier took out his cell phone and recorded back. And Haddad, the videographer, seemed to enter a state of complete disbelief at this response. He shouted at the soldier, "Ata chayal," meaning, you're a soldier. And he continued, "You're a soldier, be," and he was searching for the words to beseech the soldier to be something else and to do something else. And at the end, he became aphasic as he tried to find the words to ask for a kind of change. So now I'm going to give away the ending of the book, but you should still read it, which is that I believe that seeing is not believing. So I think believing precedes seeing, and therefore it fails to alter belief. I think we need to resist the idea that technology and cameras alone can offer emancipation. So in my opinion, what is needed is not clearer images or truer images or more images of atrocity. What is needed is not more cameras or better cameras or a wider distribution network for visual recordings. Of course, none of these things would hurt the effort to dismantle the Israeli occupation. And in many ways, they're necessary, but I argue they're not in and of themselves sufficient. So we must come to accept that images do not speak for themselves, in large part because what one can see in an image is already a matter of a set of power relations that structure vision, visibility, and visuality. This, I want to acknowledge, is a pessimistic stance. But while perhaps it's pessimistic, it yields that the meaning of an image and your response to it as a viewer is not actually fixed or overdetermined by the image. Instead, the meaning is determined by the framing of the image, which is iterative and volatile, and which dominant regimes use their power to control. And a regime's domination over the frame will change depending on who holds power. So in the US, images of Black lynchings used to circulate as souvenirs that widely celebrated white supremacy. Today, we see those images very differently. And it's not that the images have changed, it's that we as a society have begun to do the very hard and long work of acknowledging and changing our response to racial injustice. So I think these archives can live on to haunt us. And haunting is, of course, something that happens to visibility. A ghost haunts a person not with touch or with smell, but with a sudden appearance to the eyes. In the B'Tselem archives, images refuse to disappear. And in their refusal, they come to disturb the future in their call for a justice that is denied in the present. So that's a small snippet of the book. And here's a little bit of what it looks like on the inside. And because this panel is titled Active Art, I want to end by saying, I think there is a power and an openness available in approaching this material from a visual perspective, which is the perspective I come to it from as an artist. And that power and openness is this. It's to find a way into the material that is oblique. And in this oblique strategy, I find there's space to set up a thought structure about what images say about the Israeli occupation and how the visual realm can or cannot demand justice and a change to the socio-political order. So thank you.
Liat, that was profound. And both of these talks, thank you so much. I really appreciate how articulate each of you is in explaining your art, which, although it's essentially visual, is so deeply connected with ideas. And you've both expressed it so beautifully. I'd like to start off the discussion. First, I'd like to remind our audience, it looks like there are about 30 people attending, 28 or 29, to please put questions in the chat and I will moderate as we have time. We have about 20 minutes, so that's a good time for a discussion. Thank you both for sticking to your time limits so strictly and effectively. I'd like to start off with points of intersection that I see in what you've both presented, both dealing with issues of political tension, but addressing them with a completely different media and approach to contemporary issues and historical content as well. Both point to the uses of art as well as the uses of camera. Pantea didn't articulate her use of camera, but in the photographs of the nuclear facility and the historical monuments of Natanz, that can be recognized. So both of you are dealing with lenses, points of view, perspective, power and dominance, and restrictions and sanctions. And also implied is the issue of homeland and diaspora. And both of you address issues that touch upon pain, humanity, fear, anger, and powerful emotions, as well as ways that we may seek to change them. The question that I'd like to start with is if each of you, for just a couple of minutes, might address why you choose art for your activism. Liat, do you want to begin with this? You touched on it briefly in the end of your presentation, but maybe explore it a little further. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. I would say my first and maybe most honest answer is that it's the thing I know how to do, right? Like that's what I do is I work in this area that concerns creative production and art making and the visual. And so it's almost like a framework or a lens by which I approach the world. And I will say for this project in particular, so I'm a dual Israeli-American citizen. I grew up mostly in the States. I lived in Jerusalem as a young child. And going back and living in the state of Israel as an adult was really a time where I actually was forced to confront a lot of the things that I had learned as a child about the state of Israel that were sort of coming apart for me a little bit. And I found that by doing so from a visual perspective, it gave me an opportunity to have it in, right? I talked a little bit about an oblique strategy, which I know I'm borrowing from Brian Eno, and those of you who know music will know that game that he plays. But sometimes it feels like with war, as with like many other things that are spectacular, like sex, it's like if you go right for the beginning, it's like opening the centerfold and there's nothing left to see. And I sometimes feel that the role of art can be to come at something from a side so that there's an opening both for myself and for people that I hope this work speaks to.
Thank you, Carol, for the question. And thank you, Liat, for putting it into words so beautifully. I follow what Liat said. For me also, that's all I know. I've been an artist since my childhood. And I feel like art has a big responsibility to showcase important issues, contemporary issues, because it's not only visual, but also it's emotional. I lived in Iran, and then I moved to England, and then I came to the United States. I would say my art and identity now are tightly intertwined, and the perspective I have of myself and my art and my native country all have evolved through living in 3 continents and viewing how viewer observes me and observes my native country and my identity as an Iranian American is also an important, kind of observation from me from the other side. So it somehow works as like a camera. Like I am looking through my lens of art and identity and channel my emotions through my work. And it feels like it's a camera observing the events. And then being from Iran, I also have another camera observing me as an Iranian. And sometimes the two are very, very different. And I try to bring these 2 boundaries closer in the art that I make. And that's why I would like to always highlight the visual culture in Iran while I'm tackling these political tension and this difficult situation that Iranians live in, and I, as an Iranian American, also observing and go through the pain, not similar pain, but it's a different pain. So it acts both ways, and I think it's a huge responsibility, and I hope to continue to do it, to bring to attention both the visual culture, the political tension, and the difficulties.
Pantea, there's a question in the chat that perhaps will allow you to go a little bit further in this. Elizabeth Pena writes, I see that both artists also touch upon surveillance. More obvious with Liat's work, but I couldn't help but see it with Pantea's scroll, with the asymmetrical drawings looking so like surveillance video, aerial views. I'm curious if Pantea intends this or if it's my interpretation.
No, purposely, I put my scroll on the floor, I mean, close to the floor. So I really wanted people to look at it from above, from this aerial view. That is intentional. It meant different things to me. First of all, I thought if they opened the scroll in front of the king during the medieval time, they would have done it on the floor, opening it to just showcase the majestic sense of this, you know, long scroll in front of the king, to show it off. And then secondly, looking from above at something has a lot of meanings. It projects power, it projects humble presence of a country with a long history, of enhancement of art and science through documents. So it had many meanings for me when I thought about the display of my scroll. And although I'm not talking about the video, about this kind of presence of surveillance, but it is part of me. I think it is felt through the work and through the installation, through the display of the work by people. And I think that's the meaning of art. Sometimes people have to feel things emotionally and to connect. And some people don't, some people do. That's part of the whole kind of presentation as well.
Liat, do you want to add anything regarding the issue of surveillance?
Sure. Just to respond to your work, Pantea, I was really struck by the video that you showed us of you erasing your scroll, and that in and of itself is a kind of a surveillance, like a surveillance upon the self. And it was this moment where I really saw in your work that pressure that you spoke about, right? Like you're not erasing delicately, you're erasing with a lot of force behind it. So I found that really interesting, and the way you set up the camera upon yourself also to speak to some of these issues of framing and surveillance and surveillance that are coming up. Yeah, I mean, surveillance is a huge part of what I think about when I think about how cameras function. And I also think that we've almost entered a state where the photographic moment is always around us. Like, we don't actually need cameras to be present to imagine the act of photography. And that's why, for instance, there's a market for fake security cameras, right? It's enough that there is the threat of being photographed to do something, not just actually a picture. And I always bring up this one film that I think speaks to this really beautifully, and it's a film I write about in a book. It's a film by Elias Suleiman, who's a Palestinian filmmaker, excuse me. And his film is, the film is called It Must Be Heaven, or actually, I'm sorry, it's from one of his earlier films, but it has this incredible scene where the female lead, her name is Manal Kadar, and she's a femme fatale, and she's just walking straight up to a Israeli checkpoint. And Israeli soldiers are shouting at her like, hey, stop, stop. And she doesn't stop. She keeps walking and walking. And they cock their guns, really trying to threaten her, but she keeps on going. And in the end, she takes off her sunglasses, she lifts them up, and she looks them directly in the eye. And it's as if that resistance to averting the gaze is enough. And they're just stunned by her ability to look directly back, that they don't shoot. And in fact, the watchtower, right, this looking from above that Pantea you're talking about, actually crumbles behind them spectacularly in the scene. And so when I think about surveillance, I do think about the power structures and how looking back in and of itself is a kind of power, absolutely, in this project. And I think too about you, Pantea, filming yourself as well.
Yes, filming myself, and also I think projecting the idea of political tension, in the sense of how everything is observed through the camera, through the kind of lens of news, lens of understanding the situation, and then as an artist, how you interpret that. I think these are very complex lenses that sometimes we artists go through and kind of narrow it down to an installation and to a work of art to show in a gallery, or in your case, even writing about it in a book. But it's a very, very complex, multi-layered type of video and lenses, I think.
I'm glad, Liat, that you brought up Pantea's videos of her erasing, because erasure was also such a point of intersection between your two presentations. And Pantea mentions looking back, maybe you both mentioned looking back, but I also really appreciated Liat's reference to art finding a way in that's an oblique perspective. And that is so much the agency of the artist in making us aware and seeing what we might not otherwise see. I'd like to read a beautiful comment from Sakina Al-Habashi. I was not expecting to be so emotionally moved with tears in this webinar. And I thank you both for sharing your work, but more importantly, your embodiment of the art. The stories, the unease, the nausea, and with such pain and difficult focus of your work, I'm curious where and how you find the joy, contentment, and love through your own art. Does one of you want to address that first?
Oh, okay, I'll go first. I have a lot of ups and downs when I create my art in my studio, because it's a conflict always. It's the responsibility I feel, and it's just channeling my emotions through my work. So it cannot be joyful the whole time, so to speak. So there are days that are very difficult. As I said, it's a multi-layered lens that I'm going through, and to narrow it down for the audience sometimes is very difficult. But the joy of presenting my final work in a gallery setting is always there. It's always like that really beautiful moment. It's very, very divine, that moment. So it's a mixed emotional process, and especially some of my works that requires a lot of research, and it starts like 2 years before the gallery presentation happens. So imagine the 2 years of emotional ups and downs. But it is my job, and having a serious job, having responsibility comes with various layers of emotional encounters. So
yeah, it's a beautiful comment. Thank you. I'll say, I guess I treat my artwork like not in a monogamous way, but more like a polyamorous way, and that I don't really expect every emotion from every project. And a lot of times I find outlets in other works, right? This project in particular has been, yeah, it's really heavy. And it's unlike a lot of my other work, which often uses humor as a way in to something much more serious. There's nothing funny about this work at all. And I don't find much joyful there either. So I find it in other places. Over the pandemic, I sort of released my inner Jewish textile lady and began to learn how to warp my loom, like my grandmother, taught me how to weave when I was a child. So there's other places, and I actually feel it's really important to be kind of polyamorous towards your art, right? Not to expect everything from a single project, because each one gets to then have its own valence, its own emotional life, its own content. So I would say that's how I do it.
I think we have time for one more question, and we have one more question in the chat from Hannah. What do you expect of your art and activism? How can you track its impact? And can you speak of your desired outcome or give an example that actually made a difference?
I can start with that one because you've been starting with all the questions, Pantea.
Thanks, Liat.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. And I actually, I don't track it at all, Hannah. And I think for this project, my message, if there can be any message at all, is that we have to stop actually believing that visuals can be the only thing that cause change. Right. So like my message here is that there needs to be like grassroots organizing, things that are not art, things that are like large movement building that go along with anything visual. And that's what my work is trying to say. So I think there have been a lot of discussion about whether art has power or impact or importance. And sometimes I resist those questions because they often feel like they fall into a sort of neoliberal framework of where everything has to establish its importance with metrics. So I resist those, but then I also think for me, the point of this work is that actually the visual is not enough to cause impact. So we have to do more than just believe that arming police with body cams will cause an end to the violence against Black and brown bodies. So I'm sort of arguing something that I think your question is leaning towards in particular.
And thank you, Hannah, for the question too. And I agree that just one exhibition and just one body of work is not enough to kind of take me there as an activist. But I look at my art as a kind of like a road, and you start, this road, and you just continue. And I'm really hoping in this continuation of creating the work and commenting and showing my emotions and bringing it to the surface, hopefully that would create an impact. And then for me, activism is in my creation, in the way I project the content, the concept, I engage myself in the process. And then when I have the chance to speak about it, hopefully people see it as activism. But for the impact, I think we need to do more and continue to do more and to draw attention to all these, issues.
Well, thank you both for just a wonderful program. Certainly impacted us emotionally, and the emphasis on how valuable and viable visual perspectives are to understanding contemporary life and issues and solutions, in some cases, to problems, but that how it's only one component and so much more is needed fully. Majabin, I'll give you the last word, and thank you all.
Thank you very much. I'm actually at a loss of words for such profound presentations by Pantea and by Liat. I want to thank you for sharing your art, your vision, your empowering through these lenses, and you're engaging with such difficult, violent matters, and yet bringing out a message and a beautiful creativity through those lenses. So thank you so much for doing what you do and for taking the time to share that with us. I also want to thank everyone who took out the time and participated in this event. And thank you, Carol, for so beautifully moderating this fantastic panel. Thank you so much. Before we leave, I must take a moment to thank CARE for co-sponsoring this event, and also to the Walter and Elise Haas Foundation that supports our programming. And if I might just take a moment of your time to add a plug for our upcoming event in December the 1st, please join us on an event called Diaspora and Law, Jurisprudence and Diaspora, where we will be featuring Dr. Mark Massoud from the UC Santa Cruz campus and Dr. Charlotte von Robert from Stanford University. So until then, I am again speechless, but I want to thank you for your time and your presentations and for all those who took the time to participate. Matt, thank you very much for making all this possible, and thank you again to CARE. Until we see you again, stay in good health and thanks. Goodbye.